We're going to have a panel discussion with our five wonderful speakers, Dr. Enright and Dr. Aldaba, Dr. Coleman, Mr. Jackson, and Dr. Freeman. We're going to have a panel discussion, and the topic is what words of wisdom regarding agape love and forgiveness can you pass along to the audience? And Katrina and I will be asking first couple of questions, and then at this point, we would like to hear from as many of you possible. And then later, we're gonna open up for questions from the audience. So if you're ready, I'm going to ask you the first question.
And we ask that for at least the first two questions that each one of you answer.
Yeah, that would be great. So the first question to our panelists is, what important take-home message about agape love and forgiveness do you have for those in the audience now, and for those who will view the conference proceedings in the future? What would be the take-home message about agape love and forgiveness for us and for people who are going to watch the conference in the future? Yeah, Dr. Freeman.
I guess one thing that I think a take-home message that's important is something that Mr. Jackson addressed, and that is the importance of validating students' anger. And I said this in my talk this morning, but I think we're able to be a lot more successful with forgiveness education if we acknowledge that bad things have happened to students, and if we help them really address and acknowledge their feelings. And I think they won't buy into forgiveness as much if we don't ask them, like you said, what happened to you and how have you been hurt, and that must have been terrible, and then help them work through their feelings. And just one other thing that I think is really important is the idea of talking to students about the fact that everyone makes mistakes and that we have to help students take responsibility for their mistakes. That was mentioned in the talk after mine. I think did a great job of working with students from a young age about owning up to their mistakes, taking the shame out of making mistakes. I just heard a podcast where a guest speaker had also been in prison, and he talked about radical responsibility, just holding people accountable, but taking the shame out of their actions so that they're more willing to admit to what they've done and be able to move on from it. So I think we can do a lot with our youth if we can welcome them back into the community even after they've done something hurtful. No one wants to be remembered for their worst action, and if we keep viewing people by their worst action, there's no reason that they will move beyond it. So they won't be able to forgive themselves for deep hurt that they've inflicted, or able to forgive others. So just those two things. Sorry for talking so long.
That was good. Thank you.
For me, the one thing I would like to leave behind for someone to grab hold of when they leave here is, first off, I agree, the shame is a handicap. It's a hindrance. Shame causes us not to admit to something that we have overcome. And when you're ashamed, you're not sharing that, and that's not strengthening someone else. I do believe God gives you things to go through so it helps you as well as someone coming behind you. But the greatest thing I think with love, agape love, we have to remember meet a person where they are. You know, some people come and then they ask certain questions. Questions can be given or asked, you know, for curiosity, and that's a lesson to learn. Then some questions be, you know, asked to judge someone. To judge someone about what they done yesterday is not helping them be who they are today. Agape love is not judgmental. Agape love is acceptance. And when we accept who we are, truly, then we learn to accept other people who they are. And the one thing I always tell myself every single day, I'm no better than the next person. I'm here because of grace. So I always want to let people know when you're around someone and you're judging them, you got to remember you have a story also.
Thank you.
I find that in therapy, it's my job to understand. And if I don't understand somebody, I can't help them, which means I have to be a very good listener. And I have to try to get to a level of understanding, which means a level of listening, that I can say to myself, I can see why they feel that way. If I don't, and then I have to convey that level of understanding. And I have to do it in a way that sincerely shows it matters to me what they've just told me. It has to count. If people do not feel understood at a heartfelt level and cared about, they resist change. Along with that, I've been now 40 years as a psychologist, and I feel like a priest. People come in every week and confess sins. And I can honestly say, there but for the grace of God go I. When I hear and understand where they've come from, I cannot judge. I cannot. I can't stop myself thinking, if I was raised that way, if I was brought up that way, if I had that happen to me, would I do any better? I can't say that I would. So I can't judge them, but I can understand them, and I can let them know that I care.
I was looking at the audience, and I noted that most of us are in the twilight of our years. And it brings me to a fact that it's never too late to know what forgiveness is, and to encourage people to also forgive. And each one of us can be an instrument for forgiveness. That's my number one take. Number two, it's inclusive. I was listening to the sharers since yesterday, and it does not discriminate, it does not exclude a particular group of people who deserves to be forgiven and who should be giving forgiveness also. And I appreciate that. It does not, we don't have to think about the color, we don't have to think about the race, we don't have to think about religion, we don't have to think about age. It's for everybody. Thank you.
I first want to clarify that I am Sylvester's nerd friend. Hi, Sylvester. That's me. I would say two take-home messages for me about forgiveness are meaning and purpose in life. Meaning is that inner sense of why, the inner sense of making sense out of the suffering. And Viktor Frankl, who was in concentration camp in Auschwitz, said he met two kinds of people there, and they all suffered. One who found meaning in their suffering and lived, and those who found no meaning. They couldn't figure it out, and they died. So meaning actually kept people alive. And In the sense of forgiveness, the meaning often is, I'm now much more attuned to the suffering of others. I'm much more sensitive than I've ever been. And purpose is where you're heading in life, where you're going, what's your end point. What Ji Chan Kim talked about earlier this morning, the summum bonum, or the ultimate good of your life. Forgiveness helps point you to that. Meaning and purpose are oftentimes fuzzy in our modern world, when much of our meaning and purpose is superficial, like making a lot of money. Okay? The purpose, when you start studying forgiveness, is to help make other people's lives better. So you're aware of their suffering, and then you want to make their lives better. Up comes hopefulness, up comes thriving, meaning and purpose.
Thank you, everyone, for your answers. Our second question is, was there anything you heard at this conference that surprised you or gave you personally new insights about agape love and forgiveness?
I would say for me, the surprise, you know, in the world we're living in today, it's so much evil, bad, sad things going on. And so to come here without knowing exactly what to expect, other than the topic is about forgiveness, to come and hear people from Israel, Taiwan, and Ireland talking about teaching the next generation forgiveness was above what I could have even hoped for. Because here in this country, that is what me and my wife decided to do when we created our own organization. It's called the Believers for Change. Because we believe that the only way we're going to create a better tomorrow, invest in the young peoples today. And to have so many peoples around the world is targeting that generation who can absorb change, that is not corrupted, to me was the best gift that I could have received from this here. And I thank you all for sharing that.
Okay, well, definitely better than last time. I noticed the different curriculums. It was all about forgiveness, but it was tailor-made. Everyone had a lot of similarities, and they might have followed some of the recommendations that are on the website, but they also tailored it differently. And at first I was surprised by that, but then I wasn't surprised at all, because forgiveness, we have to deal with the people that we know. It's a different culture. And also, when I talked in my speech about the mystery aspect of forgiveness, I think that's part of it. You can convey something about forgiveness and wonder, gee, I don't know if that made a difference. And it can make a difference. It doesn't have to be a precise thing that you say. It can be something that you have a tear in your eye that happens when you're talking to somebody, and that makes them go, oh, wow, this person really is sincere about this. There's so many small things that can happen. So to me, the idea that you can vary this while holding on to the true principles and tailor it shows us just how big forgiveness is and how big love is. It can fit much bigger any room. Okay.
I guess similarly, I knew that we'd be hearing about the different forgiveness education projects that were occurring in Israel and Taiwan and the Philippines, but what surprised me was how many people individually are invested in forgiveness. After my talk, I had a teacher in Madison come up to me, a math teacher who wants to get forgiveness implemented in her high school, and a minister in Colorado who is interested in having the schools teach forgiveness education. So it's not just the group research projects associated with Dr. Enright and the universities, but individuals who are so passionate and invested in forgiveness education, which was so inspiring for me when I'm in Cedar Falls, Iowa, I'm knocking on the school superintendent's office door trying to get my forgiveness education into the schools. I think I'm all alone, but just hearing about other people's passion and interest was really motivating.
I share the same experience as what Dr. Friedman shared. After my presentation, I got a new friend from Belfast, and she was very much interested to connect with Holy Family Parochial School because we have the same name of the family, of the school rather, and I suppose we have the same core values and we have the same principles that we stand for. And I told her that, yes, we will connect with you, and we will start having our students writing to your students and have a sister school relationship with the school in Belfast. So I really appreciate that somebody picked up our presentation and appreciated what we are doing in our educational system. And I also appreciate that somebody approached me to request for the PowerPoint presentation. Anyone interested may get it from Jacqueline, very open to share with you, because it is something that I always believe that someone has to make a small step. We don't have to make big steps to start something, but if you will not start, who will? So that's my take. Thank you.
As I had introduced to you yesterday, my foundation for thinking about forgiveness is Aristotle. I say my buddy Aristotle. And what I found very, very interesting about this conference is what I would call, in the diversity across all the world views, there is unity in forgiveness. And Aristotle explains this to us this way. He makes a distinction between what he calls essence and accident. An accident is not about stumbling and falling. It's simply differences. And what I see in this conference, which I think is very important, is that there is an essence to forgiveness that remains the same, whether we are talking to people in Northern Ireland or Israel or Taiwan or anywhere else. Forgiveness is what it is, and it doesn't change literally across cultures or historical time, but there is a richness. Now we go to accident. There is a richness that is very different in each of the cultures. We had someone talk about the Quran. We had someone talk about Christian scripture. You have me talking about philosophy and how we looked at how Dr. Aldaba put some of the stories into the Filipino stories. And all of those are different. Those are the accidents, and that just means cultural richness. But we all are united in what this is when we use the word agape and when we use the word forgiveness. So even though we're going to be going back to our own corner of the world, we are 100% united as human beings who are moving toward both love and forgiveness. And as Sylvester says, that helps us reach a higher form of our humanity.
Thank you, everyone. Now I'm going to ask you another question. What unfinished business do we have in helping those in the audience bring the themes of agape love and forgiveness into their families, schools, and communities?
One of the things that amazes me is how all of this has just blossomed since the 1980s. And I don't know what Bob Enright thought in 1985 when he started his work. I'm sure he was hoping there might be something like this, but you can never predict exactly where it's going. And I think what might be missing for us, or what we need to do, is realize that we can take just one step, maybe more, and it pushes things along. And we may not know where that goes, the ripple effect. Someone's going to be positively affected by what you do, and you may never know it, and then they have a positive ripple effect by somebody else. So don't let doubt and uncertainty stop you from saying, I don't know how to teach a class at a school because I'm not a teacher, and letting that stop you from trying to see if you can actually make that kind of thing happen. You know, when I think of Bob Enright, you know, Bob, in 1985, you planted an acorn. And now, across the world and in here, you have an expanding forest of oak trees. We can't imagine what one simple step we can do could bring about. And never let that stop you, that doubt that it's not going to amount to much.
Well, thinking about that question, it would be good to hear from the audience as well, maybe when they could share what they need to continue to be able to do the good work of forgiveness, education, and agape love. But I'm just thinking about just making the connections, being willing and available to help someone start a forgiveness program, sharing resources, if that would help people be able to put into practice more forgiveness education, I think could be helpful to people, and helping people feel supported in this work, because sometimes it is hard to hear people's pain and help people move beyond their anger, and just offering a network of support as we go forward in this important work. It would be great to have people's emails, and I definitely want to share my PowerPoint and make that available to people. So just staying in touch through various methods would be important, I think, going forward.
The one thing I would say that when you leave here, have a made-up mind. You have to have a made-up mind. And remember, agape love has nothing to do with convenience. It's not about convenience. It's about sacrifice. It's a sacrifice that you're willing to make on behalf of someone else. You know, when I got out of prison, I knew one way that I could make it if I couldn't make it any other way, and that was by helping others. And through my giving others, God continued to bless me. He blessed me with a wife, and I come out of prison with nothing, and now I can go sign for anything because me and my wife have built our credit. All of that comes from giving someone else. When you invest in other people's lives, it's not going to be about convenience. You know, I have guys that call me at 2 in the morning, and I know I'd be tired, but I have to get up and answer the phone because I don't know what problem they have on the other end. So I think when you walk away, know that there is a determination that you have to make within yourself to invest in others, and don't let other people's thoughts and opinion dictate where you go. You know, don't let nobody else tell you who you are by what their judgment of you is. Because one thing I would never do, allow anyone's judgment of me to stop this journey I'm on. Thank you.
I believe time is very important. And while it is important, we shouldn't be rushing. We should not be having a race in terms of the implementation of the program on forgiveness in our schools. And for those who are in other ministries and organizations, we should not rush. We should be patiently waiting for those we encounter with and never give up. It's one thing that I learned when I started to communicate with Dr. Enright. Even when no one would believe in you, just go on. Eventually, the Holy Spirit will come down. That's always my prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, and let everybody be enlightened by this particular program that we are venturing into.
I want to thank Dr. Coleman for his idea of the seed growing into the yolks. I never thought about that. That's a really interesting idea. But I really did pay a very, very high price to bring forgiveness into the social sciences. I got tenure on a different topic that was in the mainstream about thinking about justice, because that's what everyone else was doing. And I got grants, and I was a fair-haired academic. And when I got sick and tired of that because I thought it was irrelevant, I moved to the idea of forgiveness because it seemed to help people. And all of my grants dried up. I didn't get one more grant for years and years. People would come to some of my students who will remain unnamed, telling them not to work with me anymore because I have ruined my career and I'm now going to ruin this person's career. Don't study forgiveness. And this person came to me one day and said, is it possible I might not ever get a position as a professor? And I took a deep breath and said, I don't know, maybe not. We don't know yet because it's too new. And that person courageously hung in there and is now a tenured professor. That's our revenge, I suppose. But I would say a key is this. When you start introducing the idea of agape love and forgiveness into wherever you are, you will get opposition. And you will get sometimes severe opposition because people will think you are crazy, okay? But I want you to remember me the first time someone says, get out of here, you're wasting my time. Remember me, because oak trees can in fact grow. I hope they don't get oak wilt, but we'll see. That I hope not. But remember me, because I have my scars, and yet we have endured, not just me, but those students who are courageous enough to keep going. But you will have opposition. I 100% guarantee you that. And don't listen to them as if they have a definitive voice, because usually they're not understanding really what agape and forgiveness are. They're coming from usually a place of woundedness, and in their woundedness, they don't want to hear these ideas. Don't let that stop you.
Thank you, everyone. We're now going to turn it to questions from the audience, and Dr. Kim has a few reminders.
Yes. Just like how we've been doing, if you want to speak, raise your hand, and volunteers will hand the microphone to you. And if you prefer not to speak, then write down your questions on the index card and hand the index card to the volunteers. And another thing is that not all panelists need to address each question from the audience. So, you don't have to nervously wait whether or not your turn is coming. Okay, so yeah, let's get started.
Thank you to all of you for this wonderful conference. And maybe the question's particularly for Dr. Enright, but if anyone else has anything to add as well, that'd be great. But my question is this. Obviously, I think we all see the value of forgiveness, and I think we understand how you can forgive a particular person. But I was kind of thinking about, especially hearing about the poverty of the children in the Philippines and everything. How do you forgive like a general situation? Children growing up in dire poverty, or people who live in war-torn countries, and there's not a particular person that you can kind of pinpoint your anger, or there's one person that's causing the hurt, but it's sort of rather a general situation. And how do you help people kind of work through those types of forgiveness situations, if that's possible?
Let me start with that. I teach a course at the university in what's called the Center for Educational Opportunity, which is first generation in college. And we have what we call minoritized youth, those who really have not had opportunities. And I've been teaching it for about 12 years. And I get that question every year. And in the old days, 12 years ago, I would say, well, try to pick out a particular person who's hurt you and try to forgive that person. And I now realize I was wrong, because the students in the Center for Educational Opportunity became my teachers. And they basically said, well, it's not just that person, it goes back a long way. And one of the ones that keeps pressing on us is slavery in the United States. So here's basically somewhat of a consensus that has developed in dialogue with the students and me, and they're leading the way. Those who instituted slavery are people. It's not some kind of amorphous, generalized statement that came out of nowhere. It came from the mind and heart of human beings. They're no longer among the living, but you can forgive people who are not among the living. And you can forgive people even though you don't see them and can hear them and physically deal with them, because you can forgive people you've never met for their ideas. And you can actually, it's more abstract, but forgive those who were quite mistaken about who these human beings are. It's not unlike a masked marauder who accosts you in Central Park in New York. You don't know that person. The person fled, and the person may never be caught. You can still forgive that person because you can think about their woundedness, their errors, their humanity, okay? And even people who make grave errors have a story to tell that includes inherent worth. And so it's more abstract, but we can go back and actually forgive those who made slavery literally a law in the United States, even though we'll never meet them. We're forgiving the deceased, but we can also forgive a deceased relative as well by being kind to the person, donating some money in that person's name, seeing that we share a humanity. I too have made errors that I wish I hadn't made out of a lack of seeing, and maybe sometimes I was tired and mean. So we share something, okay? And I'm forgiving a human being and forgiving human beings, even though that happened 200 years ago. The students were my teacher.
I cannot let that go without speaking. As the professor was sitting here, my mind was just all over the place on that one. But here's what I say. I'm a person of color in America. That right there in itself is something that I can answer from a personal perspective. Because in this country right now, more people of color are killed by those who are paid to protect them than anywhere else. simply because they're black or minorities. So how do you forgive that without having hatred, anger, and bitterness? Well, to hate an individual does not solve the systemic problem. And if you dwell on the anger and the hate, you cannot participate in solutions. So what I tend to do is I don't hold grudge because I'm hopeful that that too shall pass, but I don't forget, because to forget allows my grandkids to experience that and even more worse. So I'm not about trying to forgive a system that creates division, hatred, murder. Ask me as a person, how do I feel when I look on the news and I see an individual of white complexity kill multiple peoples and get arrested, and a black man, unarmed, gets shot 60 times? I cannot look at that scenario and hold an individual accountable, because it's not an individual, it's a system. And the only way I can address that is by learning to tear down the system that allows those kind of things to happen in this country. Thank you.
If I could just add one more thing to that. Another teacher of mine recently was the heavyweight boxing champion of the world, Mike Tyson, also African American. And he was talking with another African American about this younger man hating somebody else. And Mike Tyson said to him, a brilliant one-sentence statement: that person is not your enemy. That person is your master, because he has now changed your inner world. And you could see this other guy lean back in his seat and say, wow. And so Mike Tyson challenged him. He is not your enemy. He is now your master, because he's changed you inside. Forgiveness changes all of that.
Just as a follow-on to both of you about that, we spoke of it in our small group yesterday. Teach those of us who are not minorities how to help ask minorities to forgive. And I'm not talking about to forgive us as a class of people. I'm talking about in general, how do we teach forgiveness and agape love to people who are still being oppressed?
Let me just start with that one. I work in war-torn areas of the world. The one place that will go unnamed, I've been invited in 14 times by people in that region. And when I start talking, people get very upset with me because they are oppressed, and they tell me to sit down and shut up because I'm telling them to cave in and to just give in, and that's a misunderstanding of forgiveness. And I ask them, can I please give you a multiple choice question to see if I should sit down or not? So here's the multiple choice question, A or B. A, you will live with the problem of oppression, and it will not go away for the rest of your life. And you will live with an inner torment or misery or resentment that you could pass on to your children's children's children. That's A. B, you will live with the oppression that will not go away for the rest of your life, just like A. But if you work on forgiving, which will allow you more energy to work for justice, and you will not have that resentment for the rest of your life that you might pass on to your children's children's children, which do you choose, A or B? Everyone who's ever yelled at me 14 out of 14 times chooses B, and they let me continue, okay?
There we go.
It's on? Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Matt Savoy. I want to first thank all the speakers for having talked.
Dr. Coleman, you wanted to ask something?
Just really quickly.
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay.
It's okay.
I'm sorry.
when we are being oppressed, I see a lot of individuals who are in situations, it may not be like a war-torn country or in a country where they're really being oppressed, but they're being oppressed at work or by family members, or they're being oppressed by ill health. Situations that they cannot change on their own. So I never think, or let me put it this way, I always think that we are never helping anybody if we teach them that somebody else or something else must change in order for us to be better. We have to look inward and say, how do I want to be under the current situation that is not changing? How would I like to be that would be better? And how can I begin to make that happen? Like Viktor Frankl in the concentration camp, having everything stripped from him except one thing, he gave himself permission to share his food. That was his way of helping himself in his situation. So you're never going to help anybody if you say somebody else has to change for you to begin to feel better. We got to empower them.
I would like to address the question also. To me, I had to learn how to love without liking. Okay, what I mean by that, I learned to love individuals for who they are, but I don't have to like your choices in life. Because your choices is not going to define who I am. That's something I don't have to deal with. But as a person who is oppressed, I live in the free country of the United States. I pay taxes, but this country does not allow me to vote into a democracy that they spreading across the world. Why? Because of felony and parole. That doesn't make sense to me because the colonies divided itself from Britain for the same rules. Taxation without representation was tyranny. And if it was tyranny then, why is it not tyranny today? So the oppression that I see in this country would never detain who I am as a person because I know how to love individuals, not the systems. And if you want to get to know how to help someone, meet them where they are. Don't worry about trying to make up for what ancestors done. You can't do that. But meet a person where they are and get to know that person for who they is, and then you won't have to worry about what other people think.
Just one other comment in relation to the situation that you asked about. I think it's important for people to know that forgiveness isn't excusing or condoning. It doesn't mean when we forgive that we think what's happening is okay. And I think that's important. And a quote that I heard is, how we deal with hate, either hate that we receive from the hands of another person or others, or hate that we have inflicted on other people, really tells a lot about a person. So we can't always control our environment or our situation, as was said here by a panel member, but it's our choice in how we respond to that hate. And I think knowing that one has a choice in the way they respond can be very empowering for people.
All clear, I guess. I first want to thank all the speakers for having presented this weekend, last 2 days, and also Dr. Enright for having given the opportunity for this conference. My name is Matt. I'm a sexual abuse survivor, if you want to call it, as a child. And there's a couple things I want to comment on, and I just want to hear the speakers comment on it, whoever wants to respond. I'm just wishing to hear their knowledge on this, what I'm saying, which I feel are truths to me. First of all, to accept hurts, wrongs, and even wrongdoings, your own wrongdoings, whatever you've done to hurt other people, means you need to have change. You have to change how one views suffering. And most avoid suffering. This is a culture of instant gratification, and it causes a lot of problems in our societies. At all costs, we have to basically avoid suffering, no matter what it costs us. I mean, not avoid it, but accept suffering, no matter what it costs us. Suffering has value. And I believe we all need to understand that suffering has value. We all need to strive to be saints. Saints love and value suffering, and they offer it to God. Being able to suffer will fully, with God's grace, allow one to love others and minimize the wrongs inflicted. This is Christ's passion.
In response to your point about suffering, I think that's very true, and I often say the same thing when I give presentations, is that we are a society that really has a hard time dealing with our pain, and we numb ourselves, and we keep ourselves busy, and we haven't really been taught how to sit with our pain. And at lunch, I was having a conversation with a few people, and I had read an article by the psychologist, she writes for the New York Times, Lisa D'Amour, and she talked about the importance of helping our young people learn to see all of their feelings as being natural and normal. And our society calls feelings such as anger, anxiety, and sadness negative feelings. And she says that does a disservice to people because they're normal and natural as happiness and joy. And she said the word uncomfortable feelings is a much better phrase, because when we say negative feelings, it means we shouldn't have them. And part of living, as we all know, is experiencing sadness, is experiencing anger. Terrible things happen to people. And that is part of natural and normal emotions. And we have to help kids realize that it's okay to feel sad, and it's okay to feel angry. And we're going to have days when we do, for little things and for big things. And knowing that they can sit with their feelings and move beyond them can really help develop resilience in individuals. I told the story of my son who just graduated from college, but I would call him and I would sense in his voice that he was sad or it wasn't a great day, and I'd say, "Sam, what's wrong?" And he could tell that I was worried, and he goes, "Mom, I'm okay. It's okay not to have a great day. I'm okay. I'm allowed to be sad. I'm allowed to be upset." As a parent, you always want to see your child happy, but I think we have to help people become comfortable with their uncomfortable emotions, with suffering. And that's the whole first phase of the forgiveness model.
So Rina from Israel has a question. I try to explain clearly. So is there any referencing study showing the impact of this study that have impact on the wild local conflict? So the local conflict, she means like, Israel with Pakistan and maybe Taiwan with China. So is there any those suggestion for continue this educational program and helpful with the local conflicts?
By the way, I think that should be the last question. So anyone from the panel could respond to that question, or if you couldn't respond to the gentleman's question, you may do so as well.
I know it's a tough question.
I'm actually going to try and address that a little bit at the end of my next talk. So why don't we stay tuned? I don't want to kind of give that away because we do have a program just starting on what we're calling group-to-group forgiveness, which is different than my forgiving another person or my forgiving a group. This is about group-to-group forgiveness. And so stay tuned. You know, in about 25 minutes or so, I'm going to try and answer that one.
Thank you to all of our panelists here.